Okay, we are now live, Lucy, so I'm going to hand over to you. We've just got the attendees coming into the room for you. Just so everyone is aware, we're just waiting for that number to settle. We do have quite a large number of you who've signed up for the event today. So do just bear with us as we let you all into the room. If you'd like to let us know where you're coming from today, that would be fantastic. If you could pop it into the chat, I will be speaking with you via the chat function during the session today and letting you have any relevant links and information that you might need. That number looks as though it's starting to slow down for you, Lucy. So if you want to start, that would be fantastic.
Great, thanks so much, Alicia. Good afternoon, and thank you to everyone who is joining us. We're absolutely thrilled to have you all here with us today. My name is Lucy Osborne, and I'm one of the co-founders of Studio 360. I have short, slightly messy brown hair. I'm white, and I'm wearing a dark blue denim shirt. We're delighted to be presenting this event with the originator of the project, Dan Dorr. This event is in collaboration with the Association of British Theatre Technicians, and we would particularly like to thank the ABTT for their generous support of this project. From the moment we first approached them, they have been fantastic collaborators and supporters. This webinar forms part of the programme for the ABTT Theatre Show Online and the London Festival of Architecture. In a moment, I'll introduce our speakers, but just before that, I have some reminders about the arrangements this afternoon. As with other Zoom webinars, we recommend selecting Gallery View so that you can see all the panellists at the same time. The button for this can be found in the top right corner of your screen. We have live closed caption subtitles this afternoon from Jean Goff on behalf of Stage Text, which have been generously supported by the ABTT. If you need the closed captions, please go to the closed caption button at the bottom of the screen, and please click on Show Subtitles and View Full Transcript. You can adjust the size of the subtitles in subtitle settings. Our BSL interpreters, Ali Gordon and Max Markovich, have been sponsored by Studio 360 and Dan Dorr Creative Projects. Please do use the chat function in this webinar to talk amongst yourselves. The chat button can be found on the bar at the bottom of your screen. Alicia, the ABTT coordinator, will be looking after this today, and she will say hello to you all in the chat now. It would be brilliant if you could post your thoughts in the chat box. And as Alicia said, as a starter for 10, it would be great if you could let us know where you are joining from today. Feel free to chat to one another and give your thoughts throughout the event. This event is all about hearing from as many different voices as possible, and we'd love you to contribute as we go along. Alicia will also be posting useful links and information in the chat throughout the webinar, so do keep an eye out for those as well. When we use the screen share function this afternoon, the screen will reorganize itself to display the shared visual content, but it will return to the previous screen when the sharing stops. You don't need to do anything. Most importantly, this session gives us an opportunity to address your questions. At any time during the webinar, please do post questions you would like our panellists to discuss using the Q&A tab. This is also found in the bar at the bottom of your screen. We'll try and discuss as many questions as possible, so do post them as we go along. Today's webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available on the ABTT website, along with all relevant information after the event. It's just over a year since Dan first came to Studio 360. We were in the depths of COVID, and it was hard to think positively about the future. But Dan came to us and asked this brilliant question. Have you ever wondered what a university accessible arts centre would actually look like? And in that moment, I think Dan did something absolutely extraordinary, which was to bravely challenge us all as a community of architects, theatre owners, consultants, building managers, artists, educators and designers to set aside everything we think we know and imagine a future which is truly open to all. We're so excited to begin this journey with you all today. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our speakers. Our panel will include Dan Dorr, João Barroso and Doran von Beider from Ajay Associates, Robin Townley from the Association of British Theatre Technicians, and Kate Marsh, who is a contemporary dancer and thought leader. Kate will be facilitating the event today. So Kate, over to you.
Thank you, Lucy. It's welcome, everybody. It's really great to have so many people from different areas with us today. Lucy has already brilliantly spoken through our panel. Before I carry on, I should just briefly describe myself. So my name is Kate Marsh, and I am I love the term thought leader. It only ever gets said about me. I rarely say it about myself, but I'll take that. So my background is in contemporary dance, and most recently in contemporary dance research. And this is how Dan and I have really developed our relationship. We're long-term research collaborators, so much of our professional and personal relationship is around asking sometimes difficult questions. And just to reiterate Lucy's point, I'm really really hoping that today will give a space for as many different voices and questions. I am a white middle-aged woman. Today I'm wearing a turquoise jumper I'm slightly too hot in, and I have my hair in a ponytail. I have one hand which is actually visible on my Zoom screen now. So yeah, I think before I hand over to Dan, just to and I will facilitate later on in the discussion, where hopefully we will there'll be more space for more of you to comment, to add into the chat, and grow the discussion. That this discussion has been happening, as Lucy said, over the last year, so it feels really exciting to be in a space where we can present our thinking and hear and experience your thinking also. So I guess I'll be back later in the, to talk a little bit more in more detail about my thinking and my research in relation to this project, and then I will be facilitating a wider discussion later on in the panel. So I will now hand over to the originator of the project, Dan Dorr. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Kate. Dan Dorr speaking. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Artistic Director of Dan Dorr Creative Projects. To describe myself, I'm a white man. I have ginger hair with a short mohawk down the center of my head. I also have a ginger beard, and both of my ears are pierced, and I'm wearing a green t-shirt, and behind me is white wall with various pictures and postcards relating to dance. So thank you all very much for taking the time to be with us today. As we all resurface from this pandemic, there's a growing awareness that we need to care for each other better. During lockdown, as a disabled person, I made a commitment to myself that I was no longer going to accept living in a world that knowingly and actively excluded me and the people I care about. So I think now is the time to actively do something to change that, by creating long-lasting and systemic change. And I'll be doing this by consulting with historically excluded artists and audiences up and down the country to interrogate the violence of inaccessible architecture and design an arts performance facility that is as universally accessible as it can be. Although the majority of performing arts venues are compliant with current legislation around accessibility, there is much more work needed if our cultural spaces are to be truly accessible and for our users to experience freedom in the most generous, unapologetic way. Now, what do I mean when I say truly accessible? As a disabled performer, I hold so much anxiety over whether or not a theatre I'm presenting my work in is going to be step-free. I worry about there not being enough seats. I worry about not being able to control the sound in the auditorium for myself. I worry about the seating rate being too steep. I'm interested in what an art centre might look like if I no longer had to worry about any of those things. So I brought together this extraordinary team to find out, with the end goal being that we build a performing arts venue that centres care. As a team, we're interested in finding out what shape buildings actually need to be if they're A, inclusive, and B, designed in a way that everybody has the same user experience. So we've very much taken matters into our own hands here to make the change we need to see in the world by launching this project we're calling Reimagined Futures. Now, how do we see this playing out? We've broken it up into 2 stages. So stage 1 is to centering community consultation from the very beginning and throughout is what sets this project apart. We're partnering with arts venues across the UK, visiting 6 cities, including Shoreditch Town Hall in London, Manchester International Festival, Leeds Playhouse, and Eden Court Theatres in Inverness. Others are still to be confirmed. And at those venues, we will lead 2 consultancy workshops per venue, in which we intend to capture what it is historically excluded people want and need from an arts venue to feel free and to feel cared for. In line with this, we'll be running online workshops and launch an online survey so that we can gather as many responses as we can. With the information we gather from participants, we'll work in partnership with Ajayi and Associates to develop a digital rendering of an arts facility that includes all of everybody's needs. This stage is about saying yes to absolutely everything by producing what we're calling a Disneyland version of the arts facility, and that will exist digitally. And of course, that outcome of this first stage will be shared with audiences online. Now that takes us into stage 2. Working again with Ajayi and Associates and a task force of historically excluded members of the arts community, we will collectively decide on the fundamental architectural elements that need to be included in a new arts facility build in the future. The ABTT, the Association of British Theatre Technicians, will be part of these discussions as they look to update the Yellow Book with our findings. Our aim is to create a benchmark that will inform and inspire new architectural, institutional, and cultural approaches to the design or refurbishment of public arts buildings, looking towards a future accessible to everybody. The second stage will result in a set of building plans being produced that we hope investors will be excited enough about to invest in, and to see that what we imagine can then be built. So it's an ambitious project. People we've spoken to have described it as delightfully bonkers, and yes, they're right, it is. But to make it happen, we do need investment from the arts and building sectors to take Reimagined Futures from the theoretical into the practical to actually build this thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan. I think this is now my turn. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is João Barroso. I'm an architect and the project director at ABTT Associates. I was asked to describe myself, which I'm not used to, maybe more difficult exercise than I was expecting. I'm a Portuguese man, as you may or may not have gathered from my name. I am of average height, around 6 feet, mid-30s, white or maybe lighter to dark brown, depending on exposure to the sun. And I have unruly, short, dark hair and what passes for a goatee. I'm wearing a blue t-shirt and dialing in from home, so my background is a glimpse of my living room. I'm not sure if much is framed beyond white walls and the window on my left-hand side. Right, firstly, I'd like to start by thanking Dan, Lucy, and Emma for inviting us at ABTT Associates and us, Doran and I, to take part in this webinar, but also to take part in this project, which, as Dan described, is incredibly ambitious and exciting. So thank you, Dan, Lucy, and Emma. And we'd also like to thank the ABTT and the London Festival of Architecture for supporting and hosting. So thank you too. We're very happy, honored, and grateful for this opportunity to be part of this project, which I think is extremely important. So a few words about why this project is exciting to us, but also why we think it's urgent for the industry to engage with as a whole, before I hand over to Doran, who will raise some maybe more interesting questions with his presentation. The premise of this project, to design spaces and buildings, really, including performance arts buildings, or specifically performance arts building, which are open to everyone. I think it's a core belief of our practice and our ethos as architects. It is an extremely difficult task, and we're not always successful, but it's certainly a goal that we establish at the start of all our projects. It's also something very urgent now, and unfortunately one that we believe has been gaining momentum recently. As architects, and maybe I'm speaking for myself, but hopefully what I'm going to say resonates with others, we deal in translating abstract ideas into objective representations of space. And if we're lucky, we may get to build buildings, build these spaces. And this sort of alchemy or synthesis, sometimes, or most of the times, involves impersonating a user. I need to think within the space as a person. And this user may vary, but it's typically not far off the mark to say that architects, sometimes, maybe most times, myself included, tend to design buildings for themselves, from their point of view. It is a hard thing to escape, and in the process, guidance and regulations are created, which in turn are used as design premises or crutches, and or guidance. Yeah. But however, even though it's a very challenging and ambitious proposition, we try to make a conscious effort to avoid this prejudice, preconceived ideas, and to recognize our own inevitable biases which arise from our circumstances. And people may not agree, but to be able to see from someone else's eyes, almost impersonate different users, is I think essential to successful design. And I believe this is also why this project is at the same time important, urgent, and an incredibly learning opportunity. And it's very exciting for us to be able to consult with artists and audience members who have been historically excluded from performance buildings in the UK. Is in itself a very exciting project and good learning opportunity. So by doing so, I think we hope to better understand the brief of the project. Exactly what does it mean for a building to be open to everyone? How can we translate this into space, into form? Is it the same equal access for everyone? Do we accept that there may be a difference in access if the experience has the same value? A very series of interesting questions which we're open to exploring, and we accept our ignorance, and we want to ask you. We hope that in this process we can recognize our own prejudice and ignorance, and hopefully be better representatives of a larger group of people, and as a consequence become better architects. I think by which I mean being able to design buildings in which more people, if not everyone, feels represented. Yes, and I think this is a summary of why this project is so great. And with this, I now hand over to Doran, who will show a presentation. Thank you for putting up with me.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us here, representing AJ Associates. My name is Doran von Beider, and I am, I would say, it was wonderful to think for a moment how to describe myself. So I would say Middle Eastern, Mediterranean sort of a look, but with European descent. I have black hair, a black beard, and a black mustache with green-blue eyes. I am almost 2 meters high, which in a wonderful way leads me directly into describing why I am very much interested in this fantastic project. Beside the fact that I think us at AJ are quite interested with trying to reinvent or plan new sorts of architectural types and mechanism. But I think that being almost 2 meters high always have evoked thoughts within me, especially as an architect, on how I experience space and what sort of obstacles I deal with as being out of the very specific norm that architects and planners are working towards. And I think from a different perspective, since most of my work at the practice is involved with research, I think that being approached to participate in this project, I just reflected through my time within the academy or later in my professional career. And I couldn't really remember the amount of times that different aspects or obstacles within architecture were discussed or were even considered. And although in the recent years within Fuve project, we always invested a lot of time and energy to try to find solutions in order to give all visitors the same experience of space, I would really much thought of how could we answer some of the solutions, or how could we find some solutions to create that very specific new mechanism or new sort of architecture. And I'm going to share my screen now. And what I'm about to show you now is not at all an historical review, or as it is not a lecture, but we tried in a visual way to raise some questions, plant seeds of doubt, and share and have some ideas on how we could start tackle some of the issues and try to find some solutions. And starting with quite an interesting drawing of a scenic design, which comes from a beautiful time at the Italian Renaissance. And the ideas described here are by Nicola Sabatini. This is a 17th century designer. And what we see here, and we call that slide the ideal viewer, is really much at the beginning of all performance spaces. And with this radical example of a specific man sitting on a chair on a plinth, perfectly located from a stage, with having all ideal environment in order to see the performance. And the idea here was to use very simple mechanism of sliding boards and revolving triangles in order to give a depth and to create with artistic tricks of sorts an ideal scenery. Again, we could have looked at that image and think what could be the obstacle with that, but then again, you will need to have perfect vision, perfect hear senses, and perfect views while you're sitting at the exact location in order to receive the picture in full. Within this slide, called the ideal setting again, we can see description of the theater of Dionysus from built in Athens in Greece, a late 6th century. And on the left-hand side, we can see a sort of a drawing of the theater. We see almost the facade of a large building, many levels, steps, and in front of it, quite a large set of 3 stages, and viewers sitting in an amphitheater fashion. Again, a specific set of almost a mechanism that pushes the viewer or offers the viewer a very specific sets of conditions in order to enjoy the perfect performance, and that be sitting in a very specific location in a very clear height with a very clear acoustic conditions. On the right-hand side, we see an image of the front row seats, and these are quite heavy, beautifully carved marble seats, almost like an armchair, and again, an extremely specific set of users in a specific location that get the priority from the of the performance, i.e. the best seats in the house. And this is one of the obstacles that keep returning throughout our views. A different set of example is this medieval stage in Bonnen, in a marketplace in Belgium, 16th century. And we see a performance taking place. We see some audience walking around from the into the city square. But the stage, again, quite roughly, I might say, is located on a raised platform. Again, from that same understanding that in order to provide the best performance, a very specific set of ideas of conditions needs to be kept. Obstacles as solutions, and here we can see the Teatro Olimpico by Vincenzo Scamozzi from Vicenza in northern Italy, 16th century as well. And we have on the left-hand side, we see the floor plan with the same idea of creating a sort of a visual trick of creating depth of the space and creating a scenery which is deep enough to convey a sort of a reality. And in order to make that visual trick perfected, we need the very specific conditions of where the viewer sits and how they see it. And in the center, where we see the section, we see the depth of the scenes that is built as the set design, and the very different levels of seats. On the right-hand side, an actual image that allow us in the center, and it's funnily enough, well, not funnily enough, but the camera who took that image is located almost at the perfect seat again in the house, and allows you to see that depth of street within the center of the stage. Again, a visual trick to what they have seen as the perfect eye. And a more recent example is the auditorium building by Louis Sullivan and Dankma Alda in Chicago. And here, within this section, we see how the amount of different levels, different steps with the front of the house, the circulation that allows people to get to their seats. We see piles of stairs and different small corridors that are defined to a very specific set of users. And the sittings are all on different levels. But this is really a good opportunity to speak about the performance and the performers that also needs to be within these very specific sets of conditions in order to perform on this stage. And how do they get to the stage? What do they see from it? And what are the conditions that they have in order to perform? We also wanted to think of what history teaches us on accidental solutions, as we call them. And we can see on the left-hand side a theater as a machine by Joseph Futzenbach from 1615. And what we see there is a drawing of a center hall for viewers, and around it there are 4 stages. And the idea here that the users they walk around that main circular space, and they see the performance or different performances as they revolve. So that leaves us an empty space in the middle, and we start to think of how does a theater that doesn't have a specific sets of seats, that doesn't have the best seat in the house, that allows the viewers to walk around, to look at different angles, to look at different views. And then on the right-hand side, we see the Bayreuth Festival Hall in Bayreuth, Germany. This is 1876, and the intention behind this drawing wasn't to offer any different solution or anything out of the ordinary. It's just a capture of the hall when just before the seats have been organized within these different levels. But this gives us again an architectural solution or thinking. Can we actually have halls without seats? Can we move seats around? Could we change the perfect condition? Can we eliminate that idea of a perfect seat for releasing some or easing some of those conditions that we spoke about before? And we'll finish with sort of another set of intentional solutions that we've noticed happen during the COVID pandemic, that different halls had to find solution on how to have different sets of users by numbers, keeping new rules that were introduced to us, like the Berliners ensemble that just freed the hall from sets of seats, and we see these gaps in between, keeping a proper or a required, not really a proper, but just a required gap between sitters and viewers, and that sort of excites us and give us a glimpse on how solution might be found. On the right hand side, there's the Doma House production of Blindness, which was a social distance sound installation. And here we see viewers sitting in different directions. They have earphones on their heads, different sets of lighting. There's interesting gaps in between. Some viewers see one another. So there's a whole different and interesting sets of possibilities there as well. So again, I think the idea behind these images is just to show and to raise some questions or some ideas of more radical thinking towards finding a different solution for this fascinating project. Thank you.
I think it's me now to speak. Good, Dan's nodding. Thank you for those really interesting provocations so far. I'm a little bit aware of time, so I'm going to try and be succinct in the next part that I talk about before I hand over to Robin. Although no, we should go have time for that. This is something, a big part of my research in dance has been in an umbrella term around disability and leadership, or lack of representation by othered, marginalised or disabled people in leadership roles in the arts. So what is particularly exciting about this project for me, and this is something that Dan and I have spoken about over years, is to imagine what it means to be in spaces of ownership that we feel autonomous within. So listening to Dan's provocation at the beginning, and then listening to the wonderful context from the architectural side, I want to kind of offer a slightly upside down provocation, that we perhaps consider what it actually means to borrow space, what that means for us in terms of us as consumers of the arts, as audience members, as artists, in all the spaces, in the venues that we engage with. What does it actually mean to us to live and exist in a culture where we are essentially borrowing spaces that exist to serve normative bodies, normative lived experiences, however we understand normative, and that will differ from person to person. And it made me think, and Dan, you gave such a great introduction at the beginning when you talked about, I can't remember your specific wording, but you talked about how you access things, but also how the people you care about access or don't access things. And it made me think really anecdotally. I've really been thinking recently, it's pandemic related, anecdotes are so important and we don't use them enough in the arts because it's our personal experience. So indulge me, I'm going to be anecdotal. It made me think about all the times I have entered into a venue with colleagues or friends via a back door or a side door, or all the times my collaborator, who I've worked with for 20 years, has, even though it doesn't suit her in any way, has walked up the stairs rather than taking a lift because the lift is unavailable or non-existent. So I really want us to consider what that does for us as artists, as people, when we're borrowing space. And I think once we can sit with that and think about that, then we can really start to imagine what these new spaces might be like. And then one of the most exciting aspects of this for me, when Dan first started talking about this project to me, in all honesty, when Dan asked me what would access look like, I actually wasn't sure what to say, because I think we are so embedded in a culture of making do, in a culture of being allowed in just enough, that actually it was quite hard for me to imagine what that access might look like. And it may be something as small as, for me personally, it may be about having banisters on either side of stairs so I can hold on, or it may, but then it may also be, what does access mean to me in terms of me as a wider community? So I'm not just dreaming about what I want, I'm dreaming about what I want for the communities that I live and work in, that are my peers, my colleagues, my friends, my family. And that, I think, is the most important thing about this invitation, that yes, we may have to adjust the dream, but I think when Dan invites us all to really imagine what access looks like for us and our communities, and to think really broadly about that, and I can't remember the exact phrase, Dan, but brilliantly bonkers or fantastically bonkers. Let's engage in that a little bit and indulge ourselves in, because I think, and for me, it's time for that. We as a community have done enough coming in through side doors and back doors and politely finding an alternative when a lift doesn't work, or when our hearing loop is not in place, or any of the thing. This for me is about practical access and also about philosophical access. So we must consider how it feels to physically be able to access a building in the best way, but also I want us to consider what that feels like to be entering a space that we have designed, that we have ownership of. So there's the philosophical aspect around access as well as the practical, and it feels really key that we hold on to that. I'm only 13 minutes over for handing over to Robin, so I really look forward to talking about this more in the open Q&A. Keep on posting questions and comments in, and I will hand over to Robin. Thank you. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kate. Hello, Robin speaking. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm Chief Executive of the Association of British Theatre Technicians. I'm white, middle-aged man. I have short, wavy brown hair and wear dark-rimmed, squarish glasses. I'm wearing a black headset with a thin boom mic, a light blue shirt, and dark red tie. I've been invited, and I'm very pleased to have been invited, so I must first of all thank Dan for his brilliantly bonkers conception, and also Lucy and Emma at Studio 360 for connecting with the ABTT. I've been invited to explain why the ABTT is very interested in supporting and helping to move forward this brilliantly bonkers idea. We might not be familiar as an organization to many of you this afternoon. We were founded in 1961, as you will see, and so we're pleased to be celebrating our Diamond Jubilee this year. And in what is perhaps a little bit quaint language now, our purpose was stated in 1961 and remains to this day as follows: the advancement of public education in the technical subjects connected with the theatre and theatrical presentation, and the promotion for the benefit of the public of excellence in theatre design and technical presentation of theatrical works. And that purpose has served us brilliantly over the last 60 years and allowed us to not only support technical and production practitioners who make live performance and present it, and run buildings in which that presentation takes place and to which audiences are invited. But we've also supported those people who are involved in designing and constructing places of entertainment, both from new and also when existing premises are refurbished. But because we are a membership organisation, we have developed mechanisms to allow people who work in the theatre industry to set down the good practice that they are developing on a night-by-night basis, and codify that for the use of everyone in the sector, and also to demonstrate to other parties, third parties, how things can be done in a way that meet certain requirements. A huge amount of our work has been focused on setting standards for technical excellence, safety, and compliance. And we produce a number of publications that capture ways of meeting statutory duties. But as an industry, we are known to grab any and every new development from other sectors as the creative process sees ways of using them and exploiting them in the process of live performance. And so we have to be quite nimble to cope with using new innovations from other sectors or techniques from other sectors in new and innovative ways to meet the requirements of our creative teams and our potential audiences. And so, although the guidance we produce is not statutory, it has become soft law in that it is used by both the national regulators for safety and also by people who work within our industry as a common reference as to how to approach undertaking the process of production and the operation of places of entertainment in safe and compliant ways. And it means that that body of work, which is in a code of practice for the theatre industry in the United Kingdom, is hugely influential in going beyond statutory compliance, seeking to achieve excellence as our purpose states, and moving beyond the minimum or the required, so that we do things in a way that will support as many participants in the process as possible. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the statutory framework that governs accessibility, both in terms of the Equality Act and in terms of physical access through the building regulations and the building regulations in Scotland and the supplementary guidance that is statutory and supports those acts. But we recognise that guidance can go beyond statutory minimums, and the way to set appropriate guidance is, as Dan has already mentioned, to consult with those that it will affect. And so our hierarchy, very much in the way Dan has already expressed, is at the lowest level is the statutory minimum. Guidance can take you further, but consultation should be at the heart of developing appropriate strategies. And that is true for all that we do, and including access. So we very much hope that any of the learning that Reimagined Futures is able to produce can be captured and included in the documents and guidance that we provide, so that it becomes a universal benchmark for all practitioners and the best practice learned by multiple participants can be brought together in one easily accessible reference, so everyone can use it and everyone can benefit from it. I will hand back to Dan now, so that we get back on time.
Robin, thank you. I'm going to steamroll in over Dan, just in the interest of timekeeping. So the time is now 1:22. I think there's been such interesting provocations and sharing so far. So thank you, everybody. I think what I suggest now is if we take a 5-minute break, just so our BSL interpreters and our live captioner can have a short break, and then when we come back, we'll get back into the Q&A and also get into a discussion between the panelists. If I can be strict and ask people to be back in 5 minutes, that would be really good, so we have enough time to chat at the end. Thank you, everybody. So back at 1:27, I am being strict, if that's at all possible. If you need longer, obviously, please take the time. think we're all back. That's 27 minutes, 28 minutes past. So what we would like to do as a panel for the next half an hour or so is I will work through some of the brilliant questions that have come into the Q&A, but I also want to invite panelists to question each other. There's obviously a vast diversity of knowledge, experience, and something that always interests me, that when we come from a position of acknowledging what we don't know and what our experience does not include, that's when we can really open up to finding out or kind of getting new information. So my first offer, I suppose, is are there anything emerging from the panel, or anything that's come up from listening to each other that you would like to share?
I think there's a lot, looking at the questions and also hearing the other members of the panel. I think there's a lot of, it seems like, I'm going to rephrase it. It seems like there's a need for an index to begin with that defines the different aspects, because there's questions on who are we defining, who are we planning for, what are the obstacles, maybe some of the solutions, and it brings me back to a thought that we've discussed before the panel started, that spending 5 long years in architecture school, you invest a lot of time in trying to find solutions on how cars can park in a building, but hardly no time at all on how you use a building with a wheelchair, or what happens when you can't see clearly. And I think that's the starting to define, or to have a set of definitions, just as a sort of I said an index, and it sounds something really big, but it could start with being very simple. Sets of definitions, also linguistic definitions that will help us to be clear on what are the different aspects that we are interested in, but also, and that goes back to that idea of school or of an academy, and on the much larger scale, on how do we offer different tools to planners and designers from the very early stages of their career, to always carry that in the back of their mind when approaching a project.
Yeah, I think that, thank you, that's really interesting. I think it's incredibly leveling to me, and probably everybody here, and alarming, but also predictable, that cars would be a priority in accessing culture than people with disabilities. So I think that's something we should all kind of let that land. I think we know it, but it feels, to hear it from your own experience feels really important. So I just I'm going to try and bring together a few things, because I think, Doran, your point is really a great one about how we look at terminology and how we look at some definitions, because, as Dan has pointed out, this is an incredibly ambitious project, as it should be. It needs to be ambitious because it needs, at this stage, to include everything and everyone in the best way that they can be included. And I think that feels very important to me, and I just want to point that out, that just being in this brilliant group, I'm rarely involved in projects that are, this is how massive we want it to be, and then we'll look at what's possible. We'll really work out, once we know what the dream is, then we'll see what's possible. I think we often in the arts come at it from the other thing, that we think this might be possible, so we start very small. But I think in terms of definition, what is coming up, and something I think is good to acknowledge, and Andrew and Raquel both nod to this in different ways, and that is around how do we make space for the multiple different requirements that don't always rub well together. And I think that's a really interesting discussion in how we move forward in this, that actually when we think about access, sometimes one access requirement may make another one really difficult. Raquel, I love your idea, and I know we've spoken a lot about this in the past because I'm familiar with your brilliant work, but when you talk about horizontal seats, I'm like, yeah, great, brilliant, let's do that. And then there is a question of what does that do to other parts of the access, and I think that's a really interesting part of this research. How do we make space that is agile? How can these spaces be accessible and agile to include access to provide access for everybody? And Andrew, I'm not very good at scrolling up and down Q&As. Oh, I can't land on it now. But Andrew, to create a perfectly accessible space, we need to define what ableist architecture is in the cultural sphere. This is a huge piece of work, as it must cover all impairments and all users, artists, participants, employees, audiences. How do we achieve that? Anybody want to have a go at that one on the panel? How can we, perhaps that question is, on one level, how can we as a panel of thinkers or originators, Dan, of the project, how can we approach this huge piece of work so that it is covering, as Andrew says, everything? I don't know if anybody wants to make a comment on that.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. For me, it's around, that's why the first stage of the project is key for me, and it existing in a digital sphere, so that we can legitimately and actually design this virtual space that captures and caters for everybody's needs, and what that might look like, and that's where I'm excited for stage 2 to go. Okay, we take that and then we go like for example, and I use this example a lot. For example, in our Disneyland version, we might have 80 entrances to the venue, and digitally we find a way to create that. But when we put together the plans in stage 2 to then get it built, well, 80 might not be possible. It might, but then it might not. So we've got to get it down to, say, 4 or 5. And what's the process of that? What are the I guess what are the common denominators in those 80 doorways to get that down to, I guess, essentially, I guess, a compromise on what those 5 entrances to the venue might be.
Great, thank you, Dan. Does anybody else on the panel want to comment on that, the subject of kind of how we include everybody. It's fine if not, I just want to make the offer. Okay, I'm gonna, oh, sorry, Joao.
I was just going to say
No,
simply that I think that is Andrew's question, I think, encapsulates the purpose of the project. And I think the first step, at least in my opinion, would be the consultation with people and trying to understand individually how each people experiences these issues, which is not apparent to me because I have a completely different circumstance. And I think by acknowledging this and understanding this experience, then we should be able to put together a space, like Van said, that includes everyone. And this might be a utopia, but I think the challenge for us, at least as architects, would be to, a lot of architecture is based on trying to make compromise between two contradictory solutions. And I think that this initial step is exactly about avoiding making that compromise and saying yes to everything and understanding how each person should have the same or equitable experience in a performance venue. Design that as a Disneyland space, as Dan was referring to, and then understanding, is this possible or not? Or do we need then to make certain compromises, and what those compromises are, always in discussion with people. Sorry, that's maybe a long-winded answer, but
no, it's really clear, and it reminds me that a big part of access in its broadest sense is actually is around a genuine openness to have the conversation about the fluidity of access requirements, to be open to what isn't working and what isn't there and what needs to be there. I think that historically there's a kind of building culture or an access culture in the UK, anyway, that I've seen, that might be sticking a ramp in the front of a building and some I've forgotten what they're called, doors that do that, automatic doors. And then the conversation around access stops. So it becomes very difficult to come into those spaces and say, this would make my experience better. So it goes back to my point, we're constantly, access is being defined on the terms of normative bodies. So we're borrowing space, but we're also borrowing the concept of what access means from people who do not experience our bodies. Or have lived experience of. I just want to bring together Catherine and Jamie's points, because this might again be one for Joao and Doran, but maybe we'll all contribute. And I'm really intrigued, but I'm merging the questions. So Jamie asks about whether total inclusion access is possible. Oh no, I'm jumping around, Jamie, you've asked two, it's the first one. Are you thinking about the whole journey experience? So where the venue will be, the links and infrastructures, or primarily focusing on the venue? And Catherine earlier on in the Q&A has asked about the visual, which I think is really important because often gets left out, like what is this just about kind of physically accessing the building? To what extent are you thinking about I don't think you use the term aesthetic, Catherine, but I'm gonna put that in there, the aesthetic of the building, that I think often access is not beautiful, or the beauty of accessible buildings and venues is not thought about, it's functional. And actually, I think we don't have time to get into it now, but for those of you who are not in this discourse, I would really invite you to have a look at the social and medical model of disability and how they speak to each other in terms of architectural design, and how they often manifest as quite functional solutions. I'll see if I can put something in, or maybe someone else can put something in the chat. So what do we think about that? Is this just about the venue? Is it about where it is? Where might it be? I mean, obviously in the Disneyland stage, it could be anywhere, right? How important will that be? And then what about the aesthetic, the journey, the holistic sense of the building?
It's interesting because every single question or an idea here are sort of interweaved with one another, which is I think is quite a step forward in finding a solution. But Disneyland, in that sense, is not such a bad idea, because what we are, I mean, it's really got to do a lot with the previous question or discussion that you and Jahad just had. It's are we, maybe actually it will be as challenging as it might be. Maybe we do need to create that one example to study with and to develop and to try, and that goes hand in hand with building that index that I referred to before, defining it, because some of the aspirations we have sounds almost impossible. What I mean, when do we stop drawing and press print and we start construction? When is this stage? So, and who did we include in this stage? And what condition did we create in this stage? So, and it seems like there's always going to be someone who's been left out. So I think a great triumph or a great success of something of that sort would start with small examples, with small tests. Mm-hmm. It could be one venue. It could be even not a whole venue. It can be a sort of perhaps a pavilion, something that is being built and then dismantled. So we can, try to see how it works. Practice in real scale, in full scale. And going back again to that idea of a book of standard and what we've been taught in architecture school, I think that we sort of need to come to a point that that is being extended to into tryouts and into different ideas that can be explored and experimented but again, starting with small actions and small tests.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Darren. I think that's really insightful. I just want to remind us all of something that Dan said at the beginning, and I think this may be something that we keep on reminding ourselves of. So at the beginning of this, Dan, you talked about care. And I think when we get into these discussions about the practical and about problems and solutions, sometimes we forget about care, or care gets left behind. And I think when Darren, you're talking about how do we do this, how do we make sure, I think at every point there is something about not being afraid to come back to care, not being afraid to make space for people to say, what about me? Or this is what I would need. And I think that's what's so exciting for me, that we can do this with a sense of care for our communities and for each other. And I hope we can hold on to that. And I think I didn't say this at the beginning, and I meant to. I think we must acknowledge how unique and important it is that the originator of this project is a dance artist and a maker, and a disabled dance artist and maker, a CRIP disabled artist, and just lengthening your title, Dan. But I think that's super important, because I would be perhaps a bit controversial. I think that artists care differently, and I think that will be a really important part of this project. Raquel asks if it's possible for venues to join the consultation process. Would love a venue in Bristol to be involved. I think I can probably, Alicia's answering that question live. It's very technologically advanced. from my conversations with Dan, I think Dan wants as many people involved in the conversation and contributing as possible. Dan, go.
Yeah, can I just feed into that? And just speak to your kind of, I guess, bringing in the conversation around dance and choreography. I very much think of this project as approaching it how I make a piece of choreography. It's about thinking about, okay, so if I've got 1,000 non-normative bodies in this space, navigating space and time in this way together, what structure is built around that? So essentially, what's the set to that choreography? So the choreography of using the bathroom, the choreography of cloaking, the choreography of drinking and eating, the choreography of being assisted, the choreography of watching a show, the choreography of entering, the choreography of exiting. Okay, so we've got 1,000 different ways of doing that in the space. How do we create a structure for that? And that's what I'm really interested in exploring, but also going, can it be a structure that is able to shift and change based on a different constellation of non-normative bodies when they enter the space? Can the chairs be moved around? Can the bar be lowered? Can it be raised? Can it, and yeah, so thinking of it in that sense, I guess structurally and also culturally as well.
Yeah, good. Yeah, sorry, I thought someone else would come in there. That's a really interesting, on this note of the choreography of buildings, which is really a great analogy, Dan. I'm just going to, and I know we talked about this a lot, but I think, as Darren pointed out, it's coming up a lot. And Jamie asks if total inclusion is actually possible, and that we talk about it a lot, and that's often unhelpful, which I would wholeheartedly agree with. And then Jamie goes on to talk about more honest appraisals, and I think that's really interesting, and I think that's what this project is all about, is being honest about what isn't there and what might potentially be there. And I wonder whether what we'll end up with is whether it is complete, because access changes and it's fluid and there's this choreography, but actually my gut and my heart is telling me we have to try. Because actually in the process of trying and seeing where we get to, even if the access still needs to change, or it's not perfectly inclusive, if it is a space that is owned by the users who it is aimed at, if we have a sense of ownership, then we'll be able to ask for change. We'll be able to ask for something different, for something more, because we'll feel like it's ours to have that view and to have that stake in. And I think that that's what's lacking now. Largely, we don't feel like we can impact change in existing venues or cultural providers. I'm skimming through. Does anybody in the panel want to comment on anything? Because you're seeing the Q&A as well.
There's a set of tools that designers and planners use now. It's to find solutions to the different aspects that we mentioned, but there's and that really relates to the discussion of care, not just from whoever visits a venue, but also from the performances, and that brings a very unique element in as planners, we have to use sets of rules and regulations. There are no sets of rules and regulations to designing an experience of space, how one experience an entrance to a place or the space itself, and it's on a different and perhaps more philosophical level, but with intentions and care as part of a definition that we add to these sets of rules and regulations for this specific project to begin with. That will have a great potential to set an example, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. One practical question, which might be good to share with the audience. So we have a question about, and this is a very interesting notion, the idea that there's only so much accessibility to go round, and that priority is often given to audience members, which is very interesting when you think about the arts as a capitalistic model, that it would be the people who are paying that have the priority access. So this question goes on to ask, what about accessible technical spaces for technical staff? What about accessible, more accessible backstage areas for performers? And again, and this came up in a recent project I've been involved in, I just want to flag up that when we talk about access for performers, that might be access around information. It may be how, and I think that's an important, obviously this is not an architectural issue, but how people are invited into a space. So it may not be about whether the changing rooms are accessible, it may be partly about that, but actually how do we make sure this, and this ties in with someone else's question, which is a really interesting one. I don't know, Dan, if you want to comment on it, around the relationship we may have or priority we may give to companies such as Canduco, Stopgap, Grey Eye, Para Orchestra, who are already in the work of thinking around inclusion and access. Do you have a sense of what this Disneyland, this ultimate venue, what its relationship might be to these companies? You may not have an answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love these companies to be part of the consultation process also as part of the collective whole, and to also acknowledge that I know it's not going to be accessible to everyone. Like, I know that, but I want to give it a good go, and there's work being done, but there needs to be more work, because I think that's, I guess, the kind of, the complacency that starts feeding in to go, well, nothing's accessible to everyone anyway. So then that's why nothing changes. So I think we need to all collectively hold that from a place of collective care around going, we know it's not going to be accessible to everyone, we get that, but it's about going, we're going to give it a shot, and it's advancing thought beyond the current, oh well, everything can't be accessible to everybody anyway, so we won't bother changing. I guess that's the kind of political standpoint I'm coming from, to go, I know, but I'm going to give it a good old go.
I'm letting that settle for me, because that feels really important, because I feel like as a project this may well come up against that, because we are individually and collectively deeply passionate and moved by how, not just the subject of access, but how we experience, how we consume art, how we make art, how we go and see things, how we are part of a community of audience members. So of course there's a frustration with not feeling included, and I think what's very clear, Dan, from conversations I've had with you and at points the rest of the team, is that this might not be right at every stage, and it may be that we have to be open to people going, what about me? can we try this? Have you thought of this? But absolutely, it feels like that effort, that the time is right for that, because actually, like you quite rightly say, the alternative is we stay as we are, borrowing small corners that actually are good enough, and that we continue to make do. And I don't want to do that anymore, not for myself or for the people I care about and work with. And I think that's the opportunity here. It's 2 minutes too. Lucy, you've popped up. Shall I hand back over to you?
Yeah, that would be great, Kate. I'm really sad to end the discussion there. Thank you so much to our panel, to Kate, to all of you for turning up. This has absolutely blown our minds in terms of the feedback that we're getting and the responses from everybody. So thank you so much. We can't progress this project without your help. We need a broad range of lived experience and expertise to help us think outside the box and to come up with new design solutions, as Kate says. And we need partnerships and finance to be able to run our consultation sessions. So with that in mind, there are lots of different ways that you can get involved and help us design and build our Dream Arts Centre. The first is to please follow us, email us, call us, DM us. We really want to hear from you if you'd like to get involved and attend a consultation session, or if you've heard something today which has made you want to offer something else, please pick up the phone to us. You can also head to our GoFundMe page, which we'll drop into the chat now. We'll be adding more information onto our website and onto our social media as we go along, and we'll be writing to everyone who attended this event to give you more information about how to keep in touch. And once again, thank you so much for joining us today. The second way you can help is as an organisation or a business. Each consultation session is going to cost us £6,000 to run. We believe it's really important that we pay the people who participate properly for their time. And we also want to make sure we have all the support necessary in place for people to be able to contribute fully regardless of their disability. If you'd like to join us as a host venue or sponsor a consultation session, then please do reach out to us. You can also offer your time or expertise. We're going to need a lot of both, I think. I can't help feeling, as I look around this virtual room, that between us all, if we work together, we have the skills and knowledge we need to create something truly groundbreaking. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. And I can't help feeling incredibly excited about the future.